Good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to Maker That Money, the podcast where we talk about taking your maker hobby and turning it into your maker jobby. I am Pooch of Repkord, and with me, my trusty sidekick, Andrew Mayhall of 3D Gloop, King of the Empire of Sticky. Andrew, how are you this fine Friday morning or afternoon,
I'm
depending on where you are?
it's still morning here. I'm doing great.
Barely.
Busy, but great.
Yeah. It's so we were off last week. We
hmm
we took a little bit of time. I know our notification system on that isn't the greatest. I kind of use Twitter as just like, we're off, we're on, all that stuff. So we got our tags on the lower third down below. Follow us on Twitter if you're interested in this. We broadcast typically every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. But we are human. We are business owners ourselves. There are times where we kind of need to take some time off. I did get a suggestion from somebody last week that I thought was interesting. That would be great if we could get to that point where he's like, you can record a couple of these, like, so you have one in the can, so that when you do
hmm
take the week off, you can just like play the pre-recorded or something like that. So, we're not that advanced yet, but
Not yet.
I thought that was a cool idea. I mean, and we're good for sitting around and just jawing for a solid 60 on whatever at some
hmm
point. So just gotta hit record for a couple of our phone calls and
Yeah,
have a backlog ready. But anyway,
that's a really good idea.
yeah, well, yeah, if I got tons of ideas. It's just a question of execution, right? Which we talk about often on this thing. Like
hmm
I love to say, ideas are worthless until you have somebody
Yep.
that can actually execute on them.
Yep.
Good morning to everybody in the chat. We got John, you do it. Courtney with Filament Stories. Pez Liz, the queen of Maker Deck. Thank you for joining us. Mike, good to see you as well. Always love having you guys feed us questions, commentary from the chat. We're
hmm
going to get started here on today's topic shortly. And just to tease that, we're going to talk about process. Very sexy topic. I know that you're all very excited to talk about process and all that stuff. But before we do, I thought that maybe we could share some wins for the week. We like to focus on positivity here on Maker That Money. We're very positive people, right, Andrew? When you say we're very,
Super positive.
you always hear Andrew's always laughing and having a good time. He's having a great time over there, and we like to keep it positive. So we're gonna talk about some wins. Andrew, I'm gonna pick on you as I do always.
Put me
First,
on the spot again.
what do you got? Something good must have happened this week. 5 days in a row. You can't
Oh
tell me nothing.
man.
Dig,
Well,
man.
I mean, let's just like say trying to get back on track for Earth. I feel like I'm moving the needle, so
Good.
let's call it a win.
Listen, moving the needle. What is it? We say 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's what this life, that's what maker entrepreneur life feels
Yep.
like a lot of times. And some days you're just stepping backwards, and then other days, hopefully you're, so you got to average it out. You got to look at the big picture, right?
Yep.
And just say, this week, what did I do to move the needle, right? And
Yep.
we've talked about tools
Absolutely.
but honestly, like I use my to-do list. We use a system called Trello, which I
hmm
love. Well, I also have my little reminders list. I kind of have a couple different things I use for different purposes, but I like to use that tool. Obviously, not only for like, here's the things that I need to get done, but it's also something to look back
Yep.
on and be like, you know what, I did get a lot done. And the other tip I would add for that for people is make sure that you add all of the things that you didn't even think that you needed to put on your list that ended up on your list for the given day on there at the end
Oh
of the day.
yes.
Right? So that you have that perspective. I had a tweet last night that I said, I went 9 for 11 on the top 3 things I need to get done today. And that's the way it always is. I try to start like, I want to achieve these 3 major things, but then inevitably my list grows much larger because I don't know what
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know is going to hit me on any given day. But at the end of the day, I like to put things on there that I did. I said, you know what? I did this. I did this. I did this. And then I'm like, okay, like we're moving the needle, like you said, right?
Nice.
So,
Nice.
I don't, it's not always a luxury I've got, but I try to use that as a tool to just kind of feel better about progress and stuff. So I don't know. Tell us in the chat. First of all, tell us your wins. Tell us what's good with your life. And tell us also like what tools you have that you use to just kind of make sure you're keeping a good perspective on your productivity and all that stuff? I think regardless of whether you're a business owner or anything, I think that's a great practice to put into place. I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
I mean, I think it's great because it's too easy to get bogged down. So, let's share those wins.
Well, and we oftentimes, I feel like we need to have an episode at some point on like kind of the mental health, the stress relief component. Again, that's got
Hmm.
applications in your life well beyond, just business and stuff. But thinking about the value
Hmm.
of your sanity
Oh, yes.
and factoring that into your ROI calcs on what
Hmm.
you're doing, right? Like it may not feel like just taking some time to like do a build, like run a print for fun. We don't
Hmm.
look at those things, a 3D print. So we do a lot of 3D printing for those that are listening back later, or haven't heard us before. But doing things for fun or taking on little projects throughout the course of your week that just kind of help keep you sane, like that's got a lot of value that you
Hmm.
don't often calculate into your return on investment for all the hours that you're putting into your business, right?
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I don't know how often you're doing stuff like that. I like try to remind myself, like I've got this Prusa enclosure that I bought, like they got delivered weeks ago, that I'm like, I want to build this thing. I don't need it for
Yeah.
anything immediately. I don't have a business case necessarily, but it's just like sometimes I just need to do a build just because I
Hmm.
want to work with my hands and all that stuff. So like
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking for it. I'm hoping maybe I'll have some time this weekend. I don't know. We'll see.
Mm,
Um, so prioritizing those things, keeping investing in your mental health is important,
I
right?
think that would be a fantastic episode because there's so many things that that I've
Mm.
done in the past too, just to try and keep my sanity.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
Yeah, sanity payback. I don't know what to call it. We find some sort of mental health expert to bring. I don't know. Who would be a
yeah,
good?
there we
We
go.
have to think about a good guest to have for something like that, because I feel like that's a little bit out of my technical expertise, but I think it's an important thing to discuss, right? Mental Health Day. So,
Sure.
hey, good to see James from NorCal Machine Works. He's my buddy, my machinist pal. He does a lot of our machining work. Good to see you. So a couple more. Mayhall from Poland, if I'm not mistaken. All right, we're going international. Good to see you.
Nice.
Yeah, we got a good, lively crowd today. Oh, and Grant from
Awesome.
3D Musket. I know he was out this way. We didn't get to connect this time, but he was out at the 49ers stadium
Oh,
doing some 3D
wow.
scanning, which sounds really cool. I want to hear more about that. I'm guessing, Grant, that you got some good content, and hopefully we'll see if you can share what you were up to. It was a hot week to be coming out for stuff like that, but it looks like he survived and made it back home. So that's great. Oh, and Jason Kuhn from Evil Genius Labs is also with us. All right, I could do this all day. I
Awesome.
love seeing all our happy people out here. I'm sorry, Michal is in Rhode Island, but he was born in Poland. So I remembered
Ah,
I remembered some little nugget there for you, Michal. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's dive in on the topic of the week, because I know that's what
okay.
everybody came for, right? Talking about
Oh, yeah.
process, because that's exciting. So I'm gonna hit you with a question here, real quick, Andrew. When you're thinking about process and scale and efficiency and all that stuff, and
Hmm.
and and how you rank it in terms of importance to your business, you're in
Hmm.
a slightly different zone for where I am, because you're still kind of a sole owner operator. I know you're working on getting more away from that, and then you obviously have your partner that helps you with stuff as well. But
Hmm.
we're not dealing with like a large shop space, multiple employees and stuff. Just to give
Yep.
people some context here,
Yep.
and so when you're looking at process and the value and all that stuff, you might look at it with some different eyes than I do. But give us your feels on all of that.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, process is I view it as kind of like the single most important thing for what I do with 3D Gloop here. And the reason why is I think it comes from my engineering days, designing specific, like products or new product development, but also in the side or basically in the aspect of you know, chemistry and just science in general.
Yeah.
Everything that we do has a very defined process because if you change the process slightly, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, It's one of these weird kind of parallels that in chemistry, when we're running the reactions to actually make gloop,
Yeah,
we have very specific parameters and things like that that we have to set up to make for sure that we produce a quality product. And in doing so, we have to rigorously set up how that environment is, all of the equipment, everything else to control how we produce that product. And I think that that kind of spills into just my general operational tactics of business as a whole, because I see every little piece as an individual reaction, if you will, that has to go correctly in order for you to have a successful outcome. Being that if you, as a business, the whole idea of a business is to make money, and in order to make money you have to have things to either sell or services to offer.
sure.
And you build up all of these individual pieces, and you have to make for sure that they all stack up together so that you get the end result that you want. So in general,
Well, and not just
process
that, but then consistently over time as well,
consistently,
right? And
exactly.
that's the thing that I think makers oftentimes miss, right? Like
Hmm.
you've got a great mind for you're a chemist by trade,
Hmm.
so everything is very formulaic. Maybe some of you guys in the chat or that are listening back like to bake, right? And I know that there are different things that we do in our lives where precision really matters, right? And repeatability really
Hmm.
matters, and especially when you're running a business, having that process so that you're outputting consistent results over
Yep.
time. Not always the most glamorous thing to be thinking about as a maker, but very critical as
Hmm.
you're trying to grow your business.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. It really, for me, it comes in the aspect of trying to, like, as a maker, right? There's a lot of times where I want to get something done quickly, and maybe I'm designing a prototype print or something that I just need to crank out. I talked about this a while back on a previous episode of sometimes you have to take shortcuts, and look at what you're making.
right,
Is it going to be like a long term thing, or is this just something as a stopgap solution? How much energy and time you're going to invest? Because building out a process, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy
boy,
to get it
does it.
right and to get it
Yeah,
dialed in.
yeah,
But it's one of those things that it really pays off in the long run. So it's an investment up front that pays off later on down the road that you might not see it right away.
sure.
But in terms of the actual just business development piece, a lot of times I have to evaluate whether or not the items or the things or the tasks that I'm doing warrant actually going through and taking
Uh,
a process. Like for me,
yeah,
I fall into this idea where it's like, okay, well, we have to do this and then this and then this, and I start breaking down all of these pieces, and I figure out, okay, this is what it's going to take. And I spent a bunch of time making all of this process when winging it probably would have been better. But I've also been on the other side where I just winged it until, I get into a position where it's like, okay, well, now I've got to go figure out the process. And,
yeah.
what do I do? Like, I'm stuck.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone down a path, and I think this is probably common for a lot of people. But I start making something like I'm just messing around sometimes. Let's say
Hmm.
I'm not even working on a process or whatever, and I stumble upon a great idea, and I'm like, oh, you know what, this would be a great like improvement to a product or a new product or something like that, and then I have to like, and I'll do it and I'll get this great result, but I didn't write down any of it. And so it's like a lot of times there's this inefficiency in working backwards and trying to remember like, what is it that I actually did to get this output? Because I iterated through so many things and all
Hmm.
that. And it's the last thing that I want to do is like go back and, make notes on this stuff, but it's
Hmm.
so unbelievably critical to grow, especially
Hmm. Hmm.
once you start having to like train other people to help you do that stuff, right?
Oh, yes.
So when you're a sole owner operator and all of the process lives up in your brain, you've got a lot more, you can pull from recall, what you were
Hmm.
doing in a way that doesn't connect. We don't have hive mind. I don't have drone employees that I can telepathically
Not yet.
sense it. Yeah, we're working on that. That's the next product idea. But
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the challenge often lies for us. And I'll just tell you from my own world, when like we're releasing a new product, as simple as it may seem to a lot of people out there, we
Mhm.
look at how many times like people announce things at a trade show, talk about it on social media, like, oh, this is up and coming, and you're like, man, you've been
Mhm.
talking about that for months and weeks and or
Yep.
whatever it might be. And to the
Yep.
outsider, it's like, what are we talking about here? They're looking at the BOM, the bill of
Yep.
materials, and they're saying like, you got 5 parts here. Maybe you're
Yep.
printing some things, maybe you're laser cutting, maybe you do, yeah, but like, how can it be taking this long? And a lot of
Yep.
it has to do with, it's not that I can't make one for you and then make another one. It's that like before I can launch this thing, we
Yep.
have to have the whole system flowing so that we've got, it's not like, okay, it's live, and then immediately you sell 10 of them and you're like, okay, now I get it. It's going to take me another 3 weeks, 5 weeks to do more, right? So we're
Yep.
trying to give yourself some runway to
Mhm.
operate with. And then when you look at all the challenges that come along with that, like getting supply of materials, like things that may not seem obvious, like, hey, we
Yep.
couldn't launch because I couldn't get the proper packaging or labeling or whatever it might be. And you're going
Mhm.
through a lot of that now with trying to get your retail packaging out the door, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've been like, here at Gloop, like we've been working on several products, several projects, I should say, as well. Or additions to products that the process is the most important part. And for us, it's when we develop or release a chemical based product, because that's what Gloop is it's a chemical.
Yeah.
We rely so heavily on process. Like we've been testing, a secret purple goo for a long time. We've been sending out samples and stuff
Uh,
like that to people,
yeah.
and people like, can I get more? Can I get more? And it's like,
When can I
well,
get more of the
yes,
purple
but
goo?
no. It's hard because we have to define that process, and what we're learning is as we iterate, things change. And it's this is actually one of those interesting pieces where I would say that I like to always quote this. The only difference between doing science and screwing around is literally writing it down.
Writing it down. Yeah.
And being a person who's an engineer or technical in nature, I always write everything down. Like we have reaction lab notes and everything. So every batch of Gloop, I write down notes. I write down humidities, temperatures, the start time, the end time, like all of this data, so that I have it and I can go back and say, oh wait, something went wrong, and I can learn from it. And that's a process. That process has happened over time. It
Absolutely.
wasn't
Yeah.
a day one addition,
Right.
but it's one of those things where you focus on what is important in the long run and you build up to it, I guess.
Right. And it's,
So
you can get by just winging it for quite a while, like depending on what
mhm,
it is, how niche, what the demand is. Like we've fallen down that road too, where it's like we had some product, the demand wasn't super high, we would just kind of cut
yeah,
on demand. We just tell people like, hey, there's a day or two lead time or whatever, and that's fine. But then you start to pay that price as
yep,
it scales, right? And you're like, this isn't
yes,
going to work anymore. And a lot of times, like, you have to kind of go backwards to go forwards again, right? Like,
hmm,
uh, because and hopefully your outcome is better, that your margins end up better, your supply, if you can order in bulk, pricing can
yep,
be better. There's all kinds of obviously reasons to scale, but we as makers especially like love to test the market, right? And we don't want
hmm,
to invest a lot in how time consuming process generation is when we don't even
yes,
know if this thing is going to do as well as we hope it's going to do, right? So
yeah,
there's always that balance between kind of teasing it out, like seeing what kind of response you're going to get, doing limited
hmm,
release. There's a lot of strategies for that, that
hmm,
one can employ. Limited edition stuff like, hey, we're
yep,
only going to make a batch of 50 or 100 or whatever, which has
sure,
other advantages. Like maybe you can charge a little bit of a premium because it's a little more special to people that way.
hmm,
Um,
hmm,
I think really, as long as you're communicating and being realistic about what's happening, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. It just depends on what your goal is. We've talked in the past about just like, hey, just fail fast, get to market, minimum
yep,
viable product,
yep,
and I still stand by that. Um,
yes, absolutely,
you don't want to necessarily be building process at the sake of minimum viable product or getting to market,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But you
Hmm.
do want to at least take some notes or keep track of stuff so
Hmm.
that if you do have to go back, that it's more efficient. And that's the kind of thing that I struggle with, that a lot of people, I'm sure, tell us in the chat if you do too, you know taking the time to actually like write down what you're doing or remember.
You know,
It's hard.
it's an interesting point that you bring up, because sometimes, a lot of people attribute the failure of creating process to taking the time, to write things down. Something that's worked really well for me is just taking a video on my phone of the
I
process,
like that. Yeah.
and just document, or pictures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, like, we're like, making some custom pieces for some packaging and product, like doing some prototyping, and I've been leveraging taking photos and videos of literally me just talking through my
Mm.
thinking, like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
logical progression steps, like, if I do this, I think it's going to result in this, like formulating hypotheses on video, and then documenting what I'm doing at that point. It makes it easier to go back. It's super quick, because a lot of times you can talk through your thoughts much easier than forming it into sentences and paragraphs
No,
and
it's a
writing
good
things
idea.
down.
What do you do? So I've tried stuff like that before, and I find that like I lose time in terms of like, wait, when was I even working on that? And it's like, I guess I can at least go through my camera reel on my phone and be like, let's see. Oh man, that was like 3 months ago that I actually
So
did that.
so if people actually know me,
Hmm.
and they come over and they get, like, close, and they, like, are in my house, or in my workshop, they
Hmm.
will notice that I love boxes. Everything goes into boxes. The reason
Ah,
why
it's a
I
box man.
compartmentalize everything. So if I'm working on a specific project, even if it borrows from other projects, it goes in a box, and then I document it based off that box. So
Are we talking about like
everything kind of
banker
has this.
boxes, like old school, like those banker boxes that people would keep files in, like that kind of box, or just any old box?
So any box, like, I save shipping boxes, I save, like, plastic totes, that sort of stuff. Like, all of my projects are broken into boxes, and then I organize all my photos based off those boxes, if you will. So, for example, like, right now we were doing some prototyping on some thermoformed plastic inserts for our retail packaging.
Yeah.
I have a retail packaging box, if you will. It's got all of the, little prototypes that I've done. It's got all of the, CNC parts that I've cut out, like, everything. And then
Yeah.
in my phone, I've got an album that has all of the videos or photos or anything else that I've done along with that. And, like, all of the CAD models that I've made goes into a folder that's labeled that. And that's how I kind of keep track of specific things. And if I need to borrow things, then I basically create copies, if you will. And like, copy things over into digital boxes or whatnot.
That is intriguing to me. That's actually a really interesting idea. We use that a little bit. We started doing that for our R&D work, where
Hmm.
um you know we get these wild hair ideas
Hmm.
at the shop, and then inevitably, like, I'll get on Amazon or somewhere and buy a couple relay switches for something or whatever, and before I know it, we're just like, we've got all these little doodads that some ended up making it to a product, many didn't, many aren't, or they're in process or whatever.
Hmm.
But then it was becoming an organizational nightmare, a clutter
Yeah.
thing. And we created these bins, and it's like, okay, this is R&D bin, whatever, dated, we're talking about whatever the project was. And then if we have to
Hmm.
come back to it, at least that gives us
Yep.
some point of reference and some point of organization. So I like that. I haven't thought about expanding that to my personal life a little bit more, but I do like that, because I see that happening around here too, where I just got a lot of, like, I don't have a home for a lot of those things, and I
Hmm.
lose context, and then I'm like, where did I even put that? That's a really
Yep.
interesting idea. I like
Well,
it. I'm
and
gonna
it's
steal that.
it's been one of those things that's helped me also realize like what I actually have inventory of. It seems kind of counterintuitive because you're just like, oh, well, you need to like have a master list of all of the things that you have inventory of. But when and maybe this is just how my brain works, but when I compartmentalize things into specific projects, I can think back to the projects that I've worked on and the
Hmm.
parts that I've ordered for that
Yeah.
or whatever
Yeah.
else that might be. And like I've got bins that have hardware, like I'm talking screws that I've ordered from McMaster or
Yep.
other types of fasteners. And I come across a point in time where I need something, and I'm like, oh wait, I actually have this from a different project.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
that's
go
right.
to that project bin, I open it up, there it is, and I'm able to pull that and I create a copy. If I've got multiple, then I'll put it into the new box. I'll split it up so that
Hmm.
that way I have these sort of things. And like in my mind, I create these compartments as well, like knowing each type of project that I'm working on. Like for example, again on some of this retail packaging, I had um this component that I built a long time ago. We're talking 5 or 6 years ago, that was completely unrelated. And I was like, wait, that component would be really helpful in some of my prototyping. And I was like, well, I just go out to my storage locker. I've got a storage locker full of boxes. I pull out the box. There's the component. Like, sweet, here it is. Now I go into the digital assets. I pull the digital assets in, make a copy. Boom. Now I'm off and running.
All right, later today, I want you to go out to your storage locker, take a picture, and put it up on Twitter so we can actually see what this thing looks like. I wanna feel what it's like to be Andrew Mayhall of 3D Gloop, because I'm really loving it. And I know we're going a bit of down a rabbit hole, but to tie it back up to the process, it's like organization
Mhm.
is so critically related to the
Yeah.
whole thing, right? And it's, again, one of the things that I would say stereotypically makers struggle with. We are excited to make, we are excited to innovate and
Hmm.
create. We are not excited to duplicate and repetitive nature tasks and stuff like. And I'm not like, guys, I understand not everybody's the same. I'm speaking in generalities, but I think about my time spent at all the various maker spaces I've been to and all the things that most people have energy around, and it's not inevitably, making 10,000 of something. It's like, oh, I made this one and now I want to do either improve upon it or go on to the
Hmm.
next thing. But that's a completely different game, which is why I think it feels really special to me when like I said, maker entrepreneurs have a special place in my heart, because I think they're a pretty rare breed in
Hmm.
terms of the overall maker world, right? Because
Sure.
we've talked plenty of times, it's like when you take something that's a passion and for fun and then you make it your job, that takes a lot of the passion out of it for a lot of people, right?
Hmm.
And we don't
Yeah.
want, so we're trying to find a balance. That's why I was talking at the top of the show about like making sure you're doing your for funsies stuff too, so you
Hmm.
can still have, like I said, maker pooch and business pooch, they're always at odds with each other, but they need to be able to coexist, because we only have one body to share. um So yeah, I mean, organization critical to process, critical to
Hmm.
development, product development over time. Like, because these things take a lot of time, and a lot of times, like, here's the other
Hmm.
thing, guys. You're gonna get it wrong. Like, you're gonna spend time. You're gonna write down process, and that's gonna change. Like, you're gonna make
Yep.
assumptions about how it works. Like, what the process was for, like, let's just talk about rep box assembly. I wrote it down originally, and they were like, no, that doesn't work well once at scale,
Hmm.
because we're spending way too much time
Yep.
breaking apart parts or whatever, and so we redo the process. So it's an
Yep.
it's an always evolving thing. Now, as you reach product maturity, you start to and real scale, you start to
Hmm.
leverage a little bit more stability, a little bit more consistency.
Yep.
You have some process, and you're less apt to want to diverge from that as well. Even though,
Hmm.
because we talk about shiny object syndrome, we said like, okay, yeah, maybe we could make it a little bit better. Maybe this is bugging me and stuff, but really,
Sure.
how much is that moving the needle? Is that selling more units? Is that making the
Hmm.
cost cheaper? Is it worth the pain of
Hmm.
messing the process up? Because
Yep.
a rev change, once you've got
Oh.
the gears really turning, is
Mhm.
really painful, or can be really painful, and it can cause all the
Mhm.
gears to come grinding to a halt. And when the gears come grinding to a halt, the cash flow can slow as
Yep.
well. And then cash flow, as we've always said, is your lifeblood, the whole thing.
Mhm.
And so if you don't have other means of cash flow, other forms of income to kind of like offset, like, so think about, you're bringing a machine offline, you better have another one that you can be running, or
Yep.
two or three,
Yep.
while you're messing, with this other one that you're taking off for maintenance or whatever. And I think,
Mhm.
one, we don't have the redundancies a lot of times as makers that are just getting started, right? We don't have the luxury of having a whole
Mhm.
fleet of 3D printers or laser cutters or whatever.
Sure.
And so all of that stuff comes into play when you're evaluating your process and what's going to be worthwhile and what's not, right?
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, like we mentioned earlier, winging it will get you pretty darn far.
Oh yeah.
And in a lot of
And
cases,
pretty darn in
sometimes it can
trouble sometimes.
well, yeah, it can be better. Like, I was mentioning sometimes when it comes to, making something quickly, that MVP, you're really
Minimum
trying to
viable product.
fail fast and fail early. So that, or fail cheap and fail fast, so that you're not spending a lot of time and effort into developing something or process that might never work.
Right.
And I could kind of go back where, making Gloop, we had a process like, again, it's a chemical reaction, but there was a lot of back in the early days where we would wing that process of, okay, well, hey, when do we need to do production? How do we end up, like, how do we end up doing quality control? How do we end up making for sure that we're producing these
Mm-hmm.
consistent products? It was a lot of just like, oh well, hey, we're just gonna take it, as the orders come, we'll make a small level of inventory and call it good. And then eventually we started adding on resellers, and then we started adding on other products. And so then we started realizing, as we were winging these things, we actually had one reaction vessel that we'd make the products in, and we had a side reaction from the two products. And we would end up with, a giant mess if we had contaminants left over from a previous
Mm,
batch. And we didn't have a process for actually, like, okay, this is how we transition from this batch to this batch. This is how we make for sure that, we're doing this correctly. We would just wing it, and then we found out, oh well, wait, this isn't working.
right.
So sometimes the processes evolve out of winging it, and a lot of times, you can, just make a note. Again, just write it down, do some science, do some engineering,
Do the science,
and
people. Just do the science. That's all.
yeah, and keep winging it a bit, because sometimes that's the best option, and you kind of let the process naturally evolve. And then once you start going back, like, when we started having resellers come in, we realized that we couldn't run. It wasn't right for us to run production of our products, in a big batch, and then take out of that batch for the reseller. So what we would do is we would actually batch our reseller orders, so that we had a
Mm-hmm.
reseller batch that we could then track and say, okay, if there was an issue with this batch or this products, like, we can always trace it back. But
Right.
that didn't come until about, a year and a half ago or so.
Well, and it
And we're
wasn't
4 years old,
it wasn't
but it wasn't
necessary.
needed.
It wasn't needed. And
Exactly.
that's the other thing. The
Hmm.
process oftentimes has to evolve to allow for scale, right? Like, you're going to have
Hmm.
to create new process when you go retail. If you're, especially if you're, if you're selling brick and mortar and stuff like that, there's things that you don't have to worry, like barcoding, for example. Like,
Yep.
you're not, any place that's selling brick and mortar isn't going to take anything that doesn't have an UPC
Hmm.
or EAN, or, like, the same thing on it. um, and you don't have to worry about that stuff. But then, these are costs of scale as well too. So you have to register with
Yep.
GTIN. You have to do, a lot of other stuff, and you have to develop more and more. It only becomes more process intensive as you grow. And we don't tell you these things to scare you away. These are things that, you don't have to worry about it now, but be aware. And we've learned these
Hmm.
things by just trying it and realizing, oh, I didn't even
Yep.
know I needed that.
And we don't even have it right ourselves. Like, we're
Right.
still learning. Like, I know for me, like, it's a process to make a process.
Yes. Mayhall says process allows for agile, quick iteration at scale. He also fantastic pullback from 3 episodes back talking about technical debt. We're going to talk about this in a
Mm-hmm.
second. But process makes scaling easier by adding consistency and removing the potential technical debt. And that's
Yes.
absolutely right. So for those, give a rehash on technical debt for those who didn't hear episode 26, I believe it was.
Yeah, yeah. So technical debt is this idea if or concept of something that you need to go back and basically spend energy repaying or time
Right.
repaying a debt that you did something quickly just to get it, you winged it just to make it work. A lot of times it's used in programming, software development. You write a function, you write a program, you write some piece of code that you didn't really document, and it was a hacky way of just getting it to work, and then you
Just get it out the
realize
door.
now to scale you've got to go back and you've got to fix it, you got to do it right.
Yep.
And so that can be in anything, whether it's again, you're not writing things down as you're iterating and developing, and then you're like, well, shoot, this worked and now I'm on this and it's not working, I want to go back to that. Well, you didn't write it down, you didn't do all of that process development, so now you've got to go and repay that debt by
Right.
figuring it out, doing it right, and moving forward.
Right. So the
So,
simple version is every time you stop and say, "Well, that's a future me problem," that's you taking on technical debt, right? I mean,
yep,
very generically speaking. So I say
yeah,
that all the time. That's a future pooch problem.
yep,
But that's literally like, okay, I'm gonna deal with that down there. And sometimes that can be really painful when you punt, you know,
hmm
especially repeatedly. Well, I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with that later. And before you know it, the man comes back to collect, and
yep,
it hurts sometimes. Mike from Never Let the Machines Win had a great comment in the chat. He also says, also helpful from the end user viewpoint to document the iterative design changes. We are heavily invested in continuous improvement. I know you are as well.
hmm
When he contacts a printer manufacturer, 3D printer manufacturer, for example, they'll ask him what version of the parts he's got, and he'll be like, as the end user, I don't know. Oftentimes, because you didn't document, you didn't like. It's not
hmm
obvious to me, like unless like there's and when we think of for those of you that might have a Prusa printer out there, if you've ever looked at the printed parts on there, you'll see like there's actually a rev number on each of the
hmm
printed parts and stuff like that, so that they're very easily identifiable, which I think is cool. And it seems like
hmm
not a big deal for somebody that's 3D printing to be able to do that. But that's a process that they developed over time because they realized that they needed a way to refer to and understand on the support side, right? Like what
hmm
the customer is dealing with, because a lot of times you're making assumptions based on what time frame they bought the product or something like that, and you're not allowing for the fact that they can actually go out and print their own parts. So they might have printed a new piece, and so the support team has to have context about, if I'm going to give you helpful suggestions about how to fix a problem, I have to know what your
hmm
setup is. Maybe you don't cross that as much with what you're dealing with, but I know we do. I get asked all the time,
hmm
like, is this, I bought this rep box here, is it upgradable with your current new side panel kit or whatever? And I'll say, well, when did you buy it? I'll try to look back and see on their invoice, what's there. But it's
hmm
certainly more efficient if there's a major tell. So I feel a bit seen. I think Mike is actually calling me out because I think he was one of the people that asked me not too long ago, like, can I upgrade? And I was like, well, do you have the one? Do you do you have the box that uses these screws or these screws? Like, it wasn't a very scientific approach, but it worked.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I can't say that that we have, like those sort of issues, but we kind of have issues or potential issues similar to that. Being iterating our formulas over time. Uh Customers might have issues with how the product performs, and we've run into the issue. It's like, okay, well, can you tell us when you ordered it? Can you tell us like how old the product is, or what have you? Because then we can kind of look in our database and see what version it was, if we changed something or not back then. But moving forward, yeah, we're moving to have a process for batch control now. so that we can easily look at that and we can say, oh, hey, there'll be a QR code on our bottles where you'll be able to scan it and you'll be able to see all of the information of like when it was manufactured, how much weight was in it,
Right.
specific formula revisions, that sort of stuff. So, but that takes time to get there.
It does, and I
So,
think like Prusament is
mhm,
was one of the I think one of the first, if not I don't know. I think there's others doing it now, but they put the QR code on an actual
yep,
spool where you could actually scan it and you could see when it was manufactured and the
mhm,
full graph readout of the tolerances, like the thickness, the roundness of the thing. And that I think
yeah,
that was a really great feel. One, it's a good reference tool so that if there's ever a problem with a specific spool, they can actually track it back to like when it was produced and see if they can align it with
mhm,
other issues during that time. So a lot of the process that you're putting in place as you grow are to allow you better support and allow you
mhm,
better refinement and understand and their business intelligence tools a lot of the
yep,
times as well. And these are kind of luxury tools that we typically take on as technical debt early on in the name of getting it out to market quicker.
mhm, yep,
But the customer expectations will
mhm,
change as you grow as well. And so you need to start to have these better things. Like you're not going to get as much grace from your customer base the less connected they are to you as a company. So you really need to
mhm,
button up a lot of these things. And that's where we're struggling a lot, like with the technical documentation and things like that, where it's like,
sure,
okay, we're mature enough now. Like we really shouldn't be having as many self-inflicted injuries on I call them self-inflicted because like I'm just not sharing rev data like that Mike's talking about, or there's an awareness problem. I say this all
mhm,
the time. You rarely you have a sales problem. You most always have an awareness problem because there's so many people trying to get their message out and
mhm,
finding good ways to communicate with your customers is a challenge sometimes because they're getting hammered on all ends from all companies and more than
yep,
ever, right?
yep,
Everybody's trying to, send out e-blasts and all that stuff. So there's definitely at least you have some tools when they're an active customer. You can
mhm,
create dedicated contact mailing lists that are not marketing centric as much as informational centric. Like, hey, like if there's a
yep,
recall, for example, of course
yep,
people want to be communicated with and are going to look at that at a level of urgency completely different from like, hey, we got a new product we're trying to sell you.
yep,
So, those processes. So, like, maybe talk for a moment, if you would, more about the processes in the name of customer relations and support and all those things. Because is it the same for you? Like,
sure,
do you feel like those are kind of technical debt that you've taken on in the name of getting the
mhm.
product refined first?
Yeah, it honestly is. For about a year and a half now, we have been tracking or developing internal kind of data structures of like tracking our batches or creating essentially paper trails of bottles that we're producing, and then
Okay.
also like some quality control processes. That's a whole nother beast in itself. Like, how do you determine what's a quality product and not?
Yeah.
Um, Especially for like a chemical product like us.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the customer, kind of interface, like or just interactions, we recently, I'll draw from a recent issue that we had where we had a bad batch make it out of the lab.
Right.
We had a contaminant that got into our reaction, and we didn't have a process for checking for this particular contaminant. We never thought it was an issue until it
Hmm.
became an issue. And what ended up happening is we shipped this product to something like 50 or so customers, and at the time that we shipped it, it was fine. It was over time that it would go bad.
Yeah.
And we had to figure out, okay, which customers ordered it, how do we get in touch with them, and whatnot. And so it is making some changes here where having this batch ID tracking system is going to be critical, but we've also started investing in product registration capabilities. So when we launch in
Ah,
retail stores, we're kind of gamifying the system, if you will. You'll be able to register if you pick it up at at a store.
yep.
You'll be able to register the product and you get reward points essentially. Like we can reward you with a discount if you order online from us in the future or something of that nature.
And that's a common tactic. We
Or
see that the
yeah,
product registration has certainly a lot of
hmm
advantages as the
yeah. And I think that that's a process
company.
that's been implemented to try and track and see, for one, what product is making it where, kind of demographics as well. If you start adding those, pieces into it,
Right.
but further, it is creating or helping to create an internal process that if there are issues where you can make the customer aware of potential issues or upgrades or
Mhm. Mhm.
just have another touch point.
Right.
Um, so yeah.
Right. So Grant from 3D Musketeers in the chat is saying awareness is his largest issue and he hates it. He hates it. No, I'm sorry. It's his largest issue. I'm getting my inflection right on his all caps. Because he never knows where to start, and honestly, he finds it daunting as hell. So let's see if we can't help on that a little bit because I agree with
Okay.
you. It is daunting. Okay, but let's let's put some tools in. So hold on. I want to pause for a second. Uh, First of all, love the comment, Grant. We love it. You've called in before. I just want to remind people that there is the option if you want to actually call in, be a caller. The little linky is right above my head here if you're watching on YouTube, and it's repkord.com/MTM hotline if you're listening back in the future. So we always welcome your comments in that fashion as well. Because we really want this to be a discussion. This is an exploration. We always say we don't know exactly what we're doing. We have ideas. We've kind of been down the road a little bit, but we're
Mhm.
learning as we go too. And this is a really appropriate topic for us because it's like a lot of times you don't even know, like you said, what contaminants I need even to be aware of, like until you get to that level. I didn't
Yep.
even know, I needed barcodes until I, started talking to brick and mortar retailers and stuff like that. And then you're like,
Mhm.
okay, there's expenses. But let's talk about Grant's question here now that we've done our
Sure.
little CTA plug. Um, Awareness. I know this is a
Mhm.
bit of a digression from process, but again, I think we want to tie it back because it's all intertwined, right? It's all part of
Sure.
running the business. What advice might you have for Grant to make awareness of? I'm assuming he's talking about support awareness, but it could be new product awareness. It could be just awareness in general.
Mhm.
Shouting above the noise, like I like to say. Like how can Grant feel less pain connecting to his customers and making sure they have the information they need?
Sure. That's a tough one because I feel
I
like
don't
we
know.
struggle with awareness
Sure. I think
a
everybody
lot.
does. So what
And
you're not alone, Grant.
like yeah, yeah. So, what I can say that has worked for us is just being consistent about our just getting information out there or trying to be consistent. I'm not the greatest at it,
Yeah.
but just consistency is really big. The other piece is the more open and honest that you can be just in anything, I
Hmm.
think goes a long way. For like awareness of getting a hold of our customers when we had a bad batch. We emailed the customers that we thought were affected. We asked those customers, like, hey, if people that have, like you've talked to recently or encouraged to buy Gloop,
Hmm.
please let them know if they purchase Gloop, like, or trying to find, exactly where these bad bottles ended up. Just sometimes asking for help works wonders as well, directly from other customers. And it's tough though because I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to the awareness problem.
No, there's certainly not, and I think it often comes down to like the type of awareness that we're talking about. So if these are existing customers that you want to make sure you're getting critical information to, you need to
Hmm.
go where they are. So like you said, one of it, if if we're just talking about like, hey, I've got a new product out there and stuff like that, that's like consistency, building of that's why social media is important. Like you're just trying to go where the eyeballs are, right? Like there was a time where it's
Hmm.
like maybe you wanted to be on MySpace or wherever people were, and like we see, social media is a fickle space, like we see a lot of people
Hmm.
leaving Facebook for TikTok now or whatever. But that's a different animal than I think
Hmm.
reaching out to your existing customer base, right?
Sure.
You can certainly document, you can certainly write down a ton of stuff. You can tell them to contact you if they have any questions. Nobody's going to read it. I don't want to say nobody's going to read it. I don't
Yeah.
wanna be jaded, but like people don't read, like it's just they're so overwhelmed. They're excited to get things. So I'd never advise, as a primary means of assuming you're going to get the information out there to write it anywhere. Sadly,
Sure.
in this day and age, I don't
Yeah.
know I don't know for how much energy that takes. Like you should do it because there are plenty of people that do read. But I would say like when I talk about the global we, the royal we, the people out there, less and less reading, a lot more visual, right? So visual communication tactics, product,
Hmm.
injecting information into your product photos, like those little tags that you see on Amazon where it just says like 2-pack and like it's literally
Hmm.
embedded in the photo, critical
Hmm.
things like where it's like the, asterisk, like, CD not included with CD player, stupid
Yeah.
stuff like that. So you're not dealing with those clowns out there. Like this is a kit. This is not going to come fully assembled. Like I'm just showing you what it's going to look like when you put it together. But you
Yeah.
literally have to find ways to put that information in front of people. Um,
Sure.
when you already have this customer, okay, oftentimes, and this may be controversial for some, but it's like I don't look at like their email and their phone number. So a lot of times, like phone numbers are required for shipping these days and stuff like this. If
Hmm.
there's critical recall information, or something that I don't know, I think you need to look at it. How do you
Hmm.
set the severity of the whole thing? But I think it's fair game to try to reach out personally, not through a mailing list, but like a BCC to,
Yeah.
people where it's coming from you personally. Look, recall notice, critical or
Yeah.
whatever, where it's not potentially going to get flagged by that, or get on board with. I know we hate it, but I think using texting,
Yeah.
there's been a number of times where like I'm not getting a response to an email. I escalate. I have an escalation policy, and I need to know what to do. Like somebody orders something, and we ended up selling the last one. Like we had a stock discrepancy or whatever,
Hmm.
and they're not answering the email, and so I escalate and I'll text them from our business text line, and I'll be like, hey, I'm really sorry, this is Pooch from Repkord. We had this issue, but I need to understand, like, do you still want this? Do you want to wait 2 weeks until we get restocked? Do you want to cancel the
Sure.
order or whatever? It takes work. It takes work, but
Hmm.
you need to think about how you would want it handled if it was you, and not everybody's going to feel the
Sure.
same way. I mean, yeah, honestly, snail mail, I don't think that's a thing for most people, but it's another tactic that it's like, it's almost more noticeable because like people have gotten away from direct mail. Are there times where you might even be legally obligated like to convey in writing stuff where it's like you
Oh
have to
yeah.
send out a mailer? I don't know. I've never actually done that. I'm just thinking about what I've seen in terms of recall notices for my car or something like that.
Sure.
So it's a really tricky one, Grant. I know that that's probably not helpful. We're bouncing around because I think it depends on the context, but it takes consistency, it takes work, and it takes being a little bit creative in terms of like finding people where they are. I don't
Hmm.
know if that's
Yeah.
fair. Uh, yeah, that's we covered a lot of ground. We're closing in.
We
We got
did.
about 10 minutes left for our solid 60. Um, you know process is like I said, it's the least, for me it feels like the least
Hmm.
glamorous thing. When you came out to our facility over the summer and you were like,
Hmm.
why is there no checklist, on this, that, and the other thing? And I'm like, because I don't want to spend the time to make a checklist on how to clean the bathroom, dude. And it's just like, Yes,
Yep.
I know it's easy, and each of these individual things independent of one another are totally easy, but in the aggregate, they feel daunting, right? And so we talk about at the top of the show
Mhm.
moving the needle. So a lot of times, process is about strategy of breaking that elephant down into its consumable bites, right?
Yep.
And psychological tactics
Yeah.
for it's not that bad, like getting to
Yep.
it's not that bad.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times I just make something into something way bigger than it actually is, and then I do it, and I'm like,
And
that
yep.
really wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Why was I doing that? Are
And
you
what's
guys like
funny
that?
is
Tell me
is
in the chat.
and what's funny is oftentimes what I find that I've been putting off because it's like, oh, this is annoying or whatever. It ends up saving me time that after I've done that process or I've created that checklist, now it's just even easier to do that stupid task to begin with.
Yeah,
And to do it to a better degree. So it's like adding the insult to the to the injury.
I know, I know. You're like, jeez, you're such a whiner. Like, why am I why am I being such a baby about this? Um, it's yeah, it's an interesting challenge, but getting to a place I talk about I think the main takeaway I would say as we have gotten bigger is that process and scale are so critically interwoven
Mhm.
because what you're talking about, like, I never made the checklist. That's technical debt I took on because when I was the only one operating the laser cutter or
Mhm.
cleaning the bathroom or whatever it was, it didn't
Yep.
matter.
Yep.
Now that we have people, and now you're going to come across like legal requirements where it's like, if you're not telling people, if you're not creating that employee handbook or you're not giving people the
Mhm.
tools that they need to do their job correctly and they
Yep.
screw up, that's on you, not on them, if
Yep.
you have not given them that information. And that can be a
Mhm.
really, really painful technical debt to be taking on if it
Oh,
takes the
yes.
form of a lawsuit or a workplace injury or whatever that's out there. You pointed out, like, we don't work with a lot of chemicals where we're at, but we have like IPA laying around to like clean off stuff, and you're like, Where's your eye wash station?" And I was like,
Mhm.
oh geez, I never even thought about that, and I'm glad that you pointed it out, like, because technically
Mhm.
there is a scenario where somebody could be spraying IPA on something and it bounces up and gets in their eye or whatever, and if I don't have an eye wash station, and I think there's reasonable risk that we take on
Mhm.
as I don't want to
Yeah.
scare people away from doing it, and there's a lot of times where we're just like, oops, I'll reveal that to you guys, like, these are things, like, I have blind spots, everybody has blind spots,
Mhm.
but
But yeah.
it becomes more critical as you grow and more people become dependent on you for their livelihood
Mhm.
and you become dependent on them.
Yeah. And like here at Gloop, like, we're constantly at odds internally of when the right person comes along to bring in as an employee, like how, like, what sort of processes do we need to have in place so that that employee stays safe, but also so that we protect the core of the business as well, and that we can actually utilize that employee, like running the reactions. We deal with some pretty harsh chemicals in bulk, and we have to make for sure that we're wearing the proper safety, the PPE, and that we're handling it in a very particular way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like having to make for sure, like all of these checks and balances, and it can become daunting, especially to a small business or a maker who has no idea, what they're getting themselves into, right? Um,
Yes. Yes.
so yeah, it, it's for me, it's a fun journey because I guess I'm built different in that I love sort of these processes and thinking through this,
Yeah, no, you are
but
very good at it, I will admit. I've noticed that about you.
well, thank you, but it's one of those things where I would encourage everyone to think through what they have, what, like, if you have a business, a small business, or you're selling on Etsy or whatever, and you make things, think
Yep.
of the process of how you do it, and if you currently don't have it written down or documented, try and, document it. See, spend 10-15 minutes and see if you can recognize some
Mm-hmm.
areas of inefficiencies where you can
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, hey, if I do this instead of this, or this step first instead of this step, it changes things. Because I'm sure you'll find those, and maybe you can, extrapolate further.
Sure. I would also add to that that a lot of times you're just too close to the process
Mm,
to look at it with the right eyes a lot of the time, because you don't even realize how many little assumptions you're making because you've been doing it for so long about the process being clear, right? So
hmm.
like having somebody that's not you walk through an audit and not take that like it was so unbelievably helpful to have you come out to the shop and walk through and ask me a bunch of questions that I was just like, well, one, I felt dumb for not thinking of it, but two, it was just like, oh yeah, like that was never really a problem before, but like as we have more people coming back here, like we need to be doing XYZ.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
so either finding somebody else to just come in and ask you questions, and at a time where you're not going to take it personally, and just like understand the value of that, them not being you. Because it's hard to put those goggles on and walk through your own place that you go to every day and identify what's you become blind to it a lot of
Hmm.
times,
Yeah.
about what's important and what's not.
I believe
Safety.
NASA actually has a term for that. I think
What
it's called
really?
operational normalization.
Ooh,
So
operational
it's the
normalization.
slow, kind of normalizing of certain like aspects of a process or operation,
Hmm.
that are technically outside of its bounds. And you essentially normalize and say, oh, it's okay. I think that came out when what was it? The Challenger space shuttle
Yeah, yeah,
exploded during ascent,
yeah.
or no, was it descent? I can't remember.
Uh,
But
yeah. Challenger was Ascent,
yeah,
and
yeah,
no wait,
Discovery
Discovery
or
was yeah,
y- y-
yeah. Anyway,
yeah. But what happened there was, I think a foam
Columbia.
tile broke off.
Hmm.
Or Columbia. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's Columbia, right?
yeah.
I'm not a super space nerd. um, but a tile broke off, and it was a repair procedure wasn't followed, or I'm sorry, it was a seal, if I remember correctly. A cold weather caused the seal to shrink, hot weather caused it to expand
Yeah,
during the
Challenger, the
booster, the
O-ring.
the solid rocket
Yeah,
booster, and they just kind of like, oh, it's fine, it's okay. It was a procedure that wasn't really followed because of normalization, and that caused a catastrophic failure.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
so
And I mean that sucks because there's so many things that we probably
mhm,
just skate by on, and it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? Like
mhm.
we don't even know it's a problem. We didn't even know that needed to be on the checklist, right? I can't
Yeah.
imagine, the amount. I mean, that's why there are so many like critical checklists that launches get scrubbed all the time, like in rocket
Mhm.
science, in actual rocket science,
Yeah.
that just unbelievable levels of complexity to do that. And unfortunately we just don't have the it's so easy to Monday morning quarterback, right? The hindsight,
Mhm.
having the hindsight, and that's why we talk about failing fast being important and the failures being important, because that's where the learning happens. Nobody ever learns
Yep.
from the success.
Yep.
You always learning from the failures and stuff like that. And so we need both so that we can feel like we're making progress. But sometimes things are just unlucky too. We and
Yep.
hopefully you're identifying those things where you're really just being lucky that this technical debt hasn't come due yet, right? um
Absolutely.
and maybe it's having another set of eyes, like Mayhall is saying, or maybe it's just pausing for a moment and making sure you're slowing down and analyzing stuff. It's so hard to slow down, um, as a maker, entrepreneur, especially because it's like we gotta do the next big thing. We gotta keep that money coming in the door. We
Mhm.
gotta iterate. We don't want our
Yep.
products to get stale. We need our employees to stay happy. We
Yep.
need to cover the increase in insurance cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on forever.
Yep.
But you know, again, mental game. I think we gotta make sure we put a note down, document that,
Yeah.
because I think that's an important part of the process that keeps us sane, that keeps us marching forward. The little mental tricks for, like I said, breaking the elephant into the digestible bites, that
Yep.
kind of thing, and making sure that you're really calcing that into your ROI appropriately,
Mm-hmm.
because that is not something that is typically added, and I would argue is probably critical that it be added, especially in this day and age. I think as people seem to take on more stress and balancing, I think it's, I don't know, I don't know if it's a decidedly American problem, but like it's been shown over time. It's like we work more hours, we disconnect
Yep.
less, we vacation less or holiday less, and all that stuff. And so,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, there's a lot of meat on that bone, as I like to say,
Yeah.
to go after. So we'll save that for a future episode. I think we're gonna call it here. That was
Awesome.
a solid convo. Thank you so much to everybody that joined us in the chat. Again, if you are listening back on the podcast, we do record 9 a.m. Pacific on the YouTubes on my YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/Repkord under the Maker That Money playlist. So you can find us there if you want to join us live at some point. If you want to call in live, you can do that as well. We're easy. We love chatting.
Yeah.
Until then, I hope this was helpful. I wish everyone, as I always do, a lovely weekend. I hope that you are able to get some downtime, get some relaxation. If you are an entrepreneur and all that stuff, like take your weekends, take your time. I know you're going to work anyway. Okay. But mental health, and we will catch you next week. Until then, Pooch from Repkord,
Andrew from Gloop.
Signing off. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.